everybody, Steve Falcon here. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion on learning models, specifically continue our discussion on the Herman brain dominance model that we spent our last session getting an orientation to from Anne Herman herself. And so again, for those of you who don't know, the Herman brain dominance model was put together by a gentleman by the name of Ned Herman, who is Anne's father. He has since passed away, but his work lives on. And so we were having a good time kind of discussing where on the change grid it would overlay and what about the rest of the change grid. And so I thought today we could certainly go about talking about that. On another little subject though, during that call, Joseph texted over something to all of us, and I wasn't able to kind of fit it into the dialogue at the time, but I'd be very curious to do a little bit of an exploration of what Joseph was putting forward. So Joseph, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and share, or are you in a place you can unmute? He's there, but not unmuting. Oh,
yeah,
there he is.
I'm
hey
here.
There.
I'm here.
Hey there. Yeah, so I thought if you want to go ahead and present your thoughts to everybody, we can kind of talk them through and then have our debrief on Herman brain dominance.
Yeah, well, they were thoughts only, but I seem to go wrong with the coloring and all of that. But the main thing was that there was a difference between what I saw in the TED talk from Anne and what was presented as being the different thinking styles, as they call it.
Yeah.
So I was confused, and I think that you are most qualified to fit them in the right corners of the change grid. Yeah. So I wouldn't elaborate too much about that myself.
Well, again, I think part of the challenge was when we tried to get them to overlay, we said, well, we could probably agree that 80% of what she was describing or what the model was describing would plop where we thought it would plop. But we said, you know, maybe it really needs to be rotated. And so we were trying to figure out, well, rotate by how much and what direction. And usually we just talk about putting things at like, you know, a 90-degree rotation or a 45-degree rotation would be very exceptional what's going on. But we kind of figured out hers need to be rotated about 22.5 degrees. So that's probably the one that is proven to be the most challenging to actually get it to overlay. That being said, I don't know that we need to get that specific as we do these overlays. Because I think we kind of made peace from the beginning of it that, and I say this with all the respect I possibly can, as brilliant as so many of these models are, that's not to suggest they don't each and every one have their own little issues. And they may have made peace with their issues, and those issues may not pop up to be significant enough to cause them to lose any sleep. But when we go to merge it on the change grid, those little issues pop up yet again, and we put a bright spotlight on those to see how do we resolve that. And so certainly, like if we go to yellow for just a second, which we're saying pretty much resonates with this outgrid section of the change grid, she was saying that the strengths of that would be reading the signs of coming change. And so as we go through this, again, if everyone will just kind of go, do we agree with that, that's kind of like somewhere in the realm of the driver energy? And again, I know I'm babbling a little bit, but remember that we don't see the driver energy as being a single collection of truths. We see the driver energy as having its own continuum, a full range of variations inside of the world of that driver energy. And so we really are concerned about, well, is that an amiable driver? And is it an analytical amiable driver? I mean, you know, we really do a much deeper dive into the energies than any simple quadrant is going to do. So as we look at these different bullet points, I promise you, all these bullet points do not occur simultaneously at one single spot, but they do fall in a general range. Yep.
You know, tolerating ambiguity doesn't sound driver.
It does not sound driver. To me, but does it sound like an expressive, amiable driver?
Yeah.
And see, that's my thought. It's kind of like it might be have a predominant driver kind of element to it. But I know this for certain, the further outgrid you go, what happens to tolerating ambiguity?
Goes away.
It goes away. And even maybe we would say this, that in the very far outgrid danger zone, instead of tolerating the ambiguity, it's almost like they barrel right through it. They don't even, I don't even know if tolerating is the right word anymore, as much as it that in the driven driver energy says, to hell with ambiguity. We know enough. We're just going to barrel right through whatever it is we know. Is that tolerating ambiguity, or is that open defiance?
Open defiance.
Against ambiguity. And so again, as I read each one of these, I kind of go, well, I could find where each one of these live in the overall driver quadrant. But and by the way, if I make a little bit of rotation, I'll tell you the tolerating ambiguity is even a little bit more on the expressive side of things. And so if I did that 22.5-degree rotation counterclockwise, some of that driver range would actually end up in the driven expressive range. And so I'm able to resolve that. Now, you guys, as I just babbled all that out, hopefully you guys went like, oh no, I understand what he's saying. But I don't think it's really, I don't know that it's worth doing that level of dissection. What do you guys think? I mean, as an academic or intellectual exercise, I think it's fun, but is it really going to change the way any of you are doing your work?
No.
Oh, it's fun though, but all right. When I look at something like seeing the big picture, well, that's kind of a driver quality, but it's also an expressive quality. Simultaneous processing of different input. Oddly enough, my problem with that bullet item is the word input. Because the further outgrid you go, what happens to that driven driver's interest in
Not
different
seeking
input?
any input.
Yeah, they're not seeing. And if it's offered to them, what do they do to it?
Ignore it.
They ignore it or just go like, way beyond that kind of thing. Nevertheless, if I'm an amiable driver, well, I could certainly say, of course, I welcome the input of other people. So isn't that the whole point of being a good operations person, and making sure that we're leveraging all the talents of all the people? Or you look at this synthesizing unlike elements into a new whole. Now it's feeling a little bit on the analytical side of things. And so again, I guess what I'm just saying is that as we look at each of these four quadrants, I think it's very important for us to make peace with the fact that these things are not traveling as a set that will always be happening coincidentally and simultaneously. But inside of the grand range of what we know to be the driver, and now rotate it so a little bit of it is up here in that expressive kind of thing, I can say like, oh no, we can find where each one of those things would probably hold quite true. How many of you guys feel comfortable? Joseph, you feel free to share. Don't, your hands up,
Yeah.
but just chime in.
Yeah. So let me explain what she told in this TED talk.
Okay.
She said, basically, there are four types of thinking. And the titles of these types are payoff thinking, so result thinking, possibility thinking, process thinking, and people thinking. So it seemed to me that that was very obvious. There's a general overlay with what we see as a driver, an analytical, expressive, and an amiable. Yeah. So there in the whole picture, it was quite clear. Also, the way she explained this thinking styles. Yes. So that was my basic, but for me that was enough. So I started moving towards challenge and ability. So that brought me on a whole different road
Mhm.
towards styles of learning,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also the levels of tension connected to these thinking styles. So
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
that was the road that I took.
Well, right. And I think, you know, it's an interesting road because we have always, I don't know if it's really been a challenge as much as it's been a little bit of a puzzle, but there are some models that believe that if your pattern is strong enough, they could say, this is your personality, or this is your preference, this is your style. They're trying to find some way to say that it is descriptive of you as an individual.
Right.
And we say, well, you know, we can certainly find plenty of evidence to support that. However, we believe that every human being is capable of being any and all things, but it's dictated by the situation they find themselves in. And so we tend to say we would rather set aside personality and focus on how people respond to a situation, as opposed to focus on personality and go, well, how does that personality deal with this situation? So which one's running the show? Does personality run the show, or does the situation run the show?
Well, well,
Yeah.
the example that she gave was the military instructor, the sergeant, giving
Mhm.
the drill to the students.
Yes.
So in this type of situation, the instructor is well skilled and is a process thinker.
Mhm.
But if that man goes home and he has to solve a problem with his children, then he becomes another thinking style, right?
That would be my thought. That's how I've
Yeah,
always
yeah,
thought it makes more sense.
of course.
Now, at the same time, I understand that each one of us have our own kind of home base that we operate from. And so if the truth is, and so if I go right now to the change grid, if the truth is that for whatever reasons, I tend to be someone who lives down in this analytical kind of area, that's kind of normal for me, that's my home base, I'm okay recognizing that I have a home base somewhere on the change grid. But that doesn't mean that I can't end up anywhere and everywhere on the change grid. And I think we all know people who are very amiable by nature, and so fine, their home base is a little bit more in grid, or people that are very expressive and, you know, upgrid. I'm trying to think from um, people map. That's the free spirit. So we know that these people exist. We all know we've got these kinds of people in our circle of friends and family and all that. So I don't want to ever say that we are all the same. We're not. We have a home base, and maybe a lot of that stuff that comes from brain dominance or from one personality typing system or another, maybe that helps explain how we came to be in our home base. But once we know we have a home base, I hope we also in the next moment recognize that life sometimes, if not often, asks us to step away from our home base in order to accomplish or handle whatever needs to be accomplished or handled. And we may experience that situation as being in type or resonating with our home base, or it may very well feel very much out of type for us, but nevertheless, it's something we end up needing to do. And I think all of us have kind of made our peace with that kind of coexistence of personality versus our personality driven thinking versus situationally driven thinking. I'll stop babbling for a second. You guys agree, disagree, thoughts?
Hey, this is Peter. I would wonder if we could also think it's a co-creation that, certain types that their home base is being in charge and making things happen, and then they create the culture. And somebody, let's say like me, who's more amiable or relationship,
Yeah.
may find myself reacting to that in a certain way. So, yeah, so I wonder if part of that dynamic is we kind of co-create, these situations. And if we're not aware of our home base, that could be trouble.
Right. And again, I think it's also very relative. So for example, Peter just self-described as a people type when it comes to people mapping, or an amiable kind of an energy. Well, if Peter, if you find yourself in a situation where the driver qualities are necessary, do you become a real driver, or do you become a driven version of an amiable?
It depends. In sports, it'd be a real driver. It's kind of cutthroat, whether it's table tennis, pickleball, or whatever. It's
Yep.
really cutthroat. So I become like a driven driver, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. And so again, it's situational, but your usual home base, in fact, would you say your home base is really more of a primary amiable or an amiable driver?
It would be probably amiable, expressive, and then driver in those three.
All right. So a nice balance brings you more inside of the green circle, but on the upper hemisphere of it. So yeah, so that's good. Yeah. And so again, I think we all get it. We've been our whole lives, we've been conditioned to think and behave in certain ways. And it came from umpteen different sources, umpteen different influencing factors, but we are who we are. So I don't deny the fact that we have a personality, or that we have our tendencies, our preferences, our whatever temperament, whatever label you want to give it. But how does that change when we are given a specific set of circumstances? And that's one of the things I wanted to get into today. So I just want to suggest to everyone that if we find ourselves in a situation where we perceive the level of challenge as being extremely high, and the level of our ability to meet that challenge of also being extremely high, the right cerebral portion of our brains is going to get stimulated or called into play. And I don't know how to express this. Hopefully, you guys that have got the backgrounds in psychology and all that can express a little bit more, but do our perceptions, I'm just going to say this. I just need you to tell me if I'm right or wrong. Do our perceptions of something lead to the triggering of the release of certain neurochemicals? Does our perceptions of a situation impact how our brain is processing that experience? Or is it the other way around? You guys go ahead and tell me, what do you think? What's driving what?
I totally agree that the situation is driving the thinking style. No question.
Yeah. And so others, anyone else want to throw in?
Yeah, I would say I would agree wholeheartedly that if there's a conversational intelligence by Judith Glaser that shows if we don't have trust for someone, we have high levels of cortisol, and that could be perception. I don't trust this person for whatever reason, so now I have high levels of cortisol, maybe reactive, unresponsive, defensive, and that could in turn trigger them. So then I kind of see the way things are. I make up a story, and then that story can influence my behavior. And I believe too, our biochemistry.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Isn't it a two-way street? I don't think it's either or. It's two ways.
Well, and I think that's important, because then that second way is going to say it's going to reinforce whatever's going on. Yeah. So is that where you're going, Edie? Yeah.
Yeah, and the comment that if you're deer hunting, everything looks like a deer. And with my vacation rentals, it's amazing. Twice this week, they swear there was cat hair in the apartment. They are not allowed in there. And it's interesting that their perception, because they see them outside, they all think they are seeing cat hair. And they're not, so I think our perceptions are definitely affected by that. And that's, it's the whole thing with the people getting killed in Afghanistan, our perception that they were the enemy. So I do think it's a two-way street.
Yeah. And again, so it all goes, that's why I'm just saying, like, if I am, by definition, and I know I've done my Herman brain dominance, I am a left cerebral type. That's where my greatest concentration ended up plotting. Well, that just means that left alone, I'm going to believe that the challenges that I'm facing are not particularly high and my ability to handle them is pretty strong. And so I'm okay. I'm just going through life. If something comes, something comes. But if suddenly I'm in a situation where my perceived challenge is very high and the ability is very low, I have to believe that my brain is going to do what my brain is designed to do. Under a certain set of circumstances, the smartest thing for my brain to do is to move me into a right limbic kind of mode. Right? Why would that be? What is the value of having the right limbic set of responses available to me?
Self-protection.
Self-protection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now, do I want to live up there? I know people who do live up there, and I do believe they need medication, but nevertheless, if they live up there, then don't they view every moment of every day as some sort of a threat in their environment? I mean, their cortisol levels must be off the charts. And so I can't imagine what life would be like living up there. And how do I say this? If someone is stuck up there in the right limbic, how then do they see something that's really straightforward and practical and normal? How do I say this? I don't want to give the example that came to mind, but people who are relying heavily on the limbic side of their brain, or part of their makeup, do they have more of a tendency to live in a distorted reality or see truth for the truth's sake?
I would
Distorted.
say distortive and maybe overreactive, that it wouldn't take much for them to become emotional or what's the right word?
Right.
Yeah, hyper emotional perhaps.
Yeah. And so if they are stuck in that limbic kind of mode, and particularly right limbic, because right is more of the creative thinking. So right limbic, but limbic for sure. Is there any amount of facts and figures and data and detail you could present to them that's going to suddenly move them into a left cerebral place?
Would take therapy.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm kind of wondering about. I'm just kind of wondering.
You know,
But my feeling is that people who live in this high tension place, that as well as the people who live in the amial and analytical, they have experienced things in their life, and mostly in their early childhood, that triggered that natural state.
Mhm.
So if you want to bring an expressive person into an amiable state, then you should correct their perceptions, but that's literally therapy.
Right. That's going to take time and effort, and someone first of all acknowledging that there is an opportunity for them to change, a need for them to change, even a question mark about whatever beliefs they're holding near and dear. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you the specific situation that we're dealing with, and again, I think it's going to be it would be very useful if we could set aside whatever our own political feelings may be and instead just look at this from a tension management dynamic and see what we can understand from that. So we're in the state of Arizona. So Joseph, I don't know if if you've heard anything at all about this. I don't see any reason why the world at large needs to, but following the election, a gigantic question mark came up about whether or not the elections in Arizona were run properly. And so the Senate of the state of Arizona, which this tends to be more of a Republican state, decided to order an audit. And the audit is being conducted by a third party, and tremendous question marks have been raised about this provider called Cyber Ninjas. They have no experience in doing audits, and on and on and on. Well, recently, the Supreme Court of the state of Arizona has ordered cyber ninjas to release all of their data to the general public. So we know how it was done, whatever, because they haven't reported any findings yet. And it's already been, multiple audits have already been done, and nothing out of the ordinary was really found of any significant kind of value or whatever. But nevertheless, this is all being ordered. So I'm giving you that as background just so I could say this. One of the news stations decided to do a little man on the street sort of an interview kind of a thing, not to asking anyone what their political affiliations might have been. And they just said, assume for a second that the results of the audit show that there was nothing went wrong. Now are you convinced that the election was legitimate? And they said, no, nothing will ever change their mind. And this is what they were going for, that there was absolutely no amount of evidence that could come forward from anybody, whatever side you were on, whatever, that will ever change their mind that the election was stolen. And so I thought, like, okay, where does that mind reside on the change grid? And what is it that's supporting that decision that no amount of evidence from any source is ever going to change their mind?
Well,
And
this
so
sounds like a driven driver, T.
that it sounds like a driven driver. And what caused me to really wonder about that is that, well, but the driven driver is supposed to be more cerebral, not driven by limbic kind of, supposedly the cerebral piece is telling us facts and figures matter, that,
It should be expressive, but I remember that you wrote this extensive piece about dysfunctionality. I don't know if you know what I refer to, but and that you explained that some illnesses, I don't know, addictions or distortions, they are transferred from generation to generation. And well, this reveals some of my political orientation, maybe, but it seems like these type of people, they are inheriting this feeling of constant threat and explain, how do you call it, like explaining why it something that's obviously wrong.
Yeah, so find some way to justify, because see, to David's observation, as there might be driven drivers, if they're in the danger zone, well, then they're neighbors with this upgrade danger zone. And so do we hear in the way they share their attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, etc., that it really is all coming from a limbic place, a gut level emotional. And again, I'm relying on you guys to tell me what this limbic system actually includes and how it's really different from the from what's happening with the cerebral kind of functions. But if it is being driven by hunches, instinct, intuitions, beliefs independent of fact, etc., that could put them in a feeling of being so totally threatened that when they are challenged, they become these highly driven drivers, ready to fight no matter what, although there's nothing to really fight. So yeah.
When they shift from the upgrid to the outgrid energy, do they really perceive an increase in ability?
I think that they that in their distorted reality, because outside of this red circle, reality has been completely set aside. And now there's just this distortion of what's really going on. I believe in their distorted self-perceptions. They believe that they can conquer the world. They believe that they can.
That they're right.
That they're right and they are righteous.
Right.
And so they can be justified because they believe they're the ones that are saving, the only ones left who can save the world or save our country or whatever. And obviously it's a lot of grandiose thinking, and this country has been through far worse.
Or you could just say they think they can save Arizona. And we're talking about Arizona, and Arizona had two federally, companies that do audits for their living come in and tear everything apart and say, we've never seen a better one. We can't find anything. And before this, Arizona had an amazing reputation for voting practices and
right, the quality of voting by
the
mail.
quality
And
of
all
voting
that,
there. They would
right,
call us to say, how do you guys do it?
right. Yeah,
So-
it's all very strange. But again, from the whole vantage point of tension management, which, by the way, again, I think that politics is an expression of tension management. It's not separate from that. Depending on where you end up being moved around on the change grid, a lot of your beliefs and convictions are automatically going to change. And so, yeah, you still have some fundamental kind of a belief that's putting you someplace to begin with. But I do believe that as people move further up grid, it becomes easier and easier to move them even further up grid. So if I want to manipulate that population, I can easily do so. Now, for me to do it, I've got to be more outgrid. This is where things are more calculated and deliberate. But I am the manipulator, and I'm moving them further upgrid because I don't want them to be in a healthy spot. And now if I can turn some of those into part of the army that's out there, holding fast to whatever they're being fed, well, from a tension management perspective, it's still the result of a very calculated campaign of manipulation for a particular reason. And so I think that's what I find most fascinating to me, this whole political stuff about who's in office. I've shared this with you guys before. To me, they're all a horrible disappointment. I don't care who you point to. It's just, it's all terrible. Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
Would they be using cerebral methods to incite a limbic response?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I forget who actually originally said it, but it's come up many times, is that a lie that is often and strongly repeated will become someone else's truth.
Yeah.
So all you got to do, and it's got to be, I think of the three categories, it has to be outrageous, it has to be loudly repeated, and it has to be frequently repeated. But if you can be outrageous, loud, and frequent, sooner or later, you're going to get a whole bunch of people that are just going to accept it as the truth.
And T, wouldn't you say that's how these people get radicalized?
I believe that's how people get radicalized, no matter where we're looking at radical behavior around the world.
And it's easy to do. I think in another webinar that we did, when we talked about disinformation, that information that makes us angry or anxious puts us there. And if you can make people angry or anxious, you can control them.
Yep, absolutely. And very often, in fact, I'm going to give you guys another little example where, let's say that the people who have been running the show or have been, how about just going to say, richly contributing to the upward movement of a lot of our population on the change grid, let's say they come along and kind of go like, well, it's time for us to fix that. We need to correct that because what we were saying is now so proven to be wrong, blah, blah, blah. And the example I'll give is one about vaccines. And so for the longest period of time, the message was that vaccines were optional and they haven't been really tested yet and they haven't been approved by anybody and everybody and blah 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 blah. So don't take it. And although it never should have become a political thing about wearing masks or vaccinations, because again, a virus doesn't really care what party you're affiliated with, particularly one that's it's affecting the entire world. But then, and I'm just going to give this as a quick example. Do you guys remember when Trump then spoke? I forget if he was in Ohio or wherever, and he was telling all of his followers, get the vaccine. And what did they all do? Do you remember?
Yeah, they booed him.
They booed him. It's kind of like everybody that's in this gigantic arena, Coliseum, wherever it was, it's kind of like your leader is speaking to you. And he's telling you to do this. So now you're going to, you're so locked in to whatever it is that you've adopted up to that point that now you're Wow. So can you imagine? It's kind of like, oops, that worked a little too well. So yeah, it's interesting. Lots
Wouldn't
of
you
hands
say,
are coming. Just go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, wouldn't you say it's kind of like once the genie's out of the bottle, this is what happens?
Yeah. And so I go like, we can talk about all the little politic stuff around it all you want, but that's really to me not interesting. What's interesting is viewing politics as being an arena in which tension is managed,
Mhm.
and who's doing the managing and for what reason, and is it working, is it not working, how do you correct it, will anything ever change it, on and on and on and on. And so yeah, anyway, there
So
you go,
T, would you
thoughts. Yeah.
would you say that there was a lot of cerebral information shared that caused the January 6th episode to be such an outgrid
Yeah,
expression?
absolutely, absolutely.
And
Some messaging that had been started long, long, long ago ended up raising the level of tension of a certain population. Obviously, their behavior became very reactive because they felt very threatened. Think about that. The situation as was being presented was, you're about to lose our country, our democracy, or whatever. So that was very much an upgrid movement. Well, when you move people upgrid, remember that those 4 danger zones are right next to each other. And so some of those people that were upgraded decided to fight. Some decided to flee. Some faded. They didn't show up, but you kind of get the idea of all that. And now keep in mind that when we talk about what happened at the Capitol, that for every individual who entered the building, how many dozens, if not hundreds, were just outside and just, there to protest, and fine, they were screaming whatever they wanted to scream, but they didn't breach the building or whatever. They didn't do anything that crossed a line. Well, that's, to me, is it's going like, oh no, it moved everybody very far up grid. And of that population that was moved very far up grid, some were emboldened. And they're the ones who went up the steps and went onto the entrances and ultimately breached the security of that building and did the kinds of things that had to be done. They're a handful of people, but nevertheless, I think that it's demonstrating what we're talking about here. When people get moved too far upgrid, you're going to watch some of them suddenly become very outgrid. Yes, thoughts, comments?
yeah, yeah, I can't help myself.
Yeah.
So I want to respond on this idea of cerebral, like deliberate orchestration of these types of events.
Yep.
Because unfortunately, I've been involved in these type of groups in my youth. Like I was connected to this radical Muslim groups,
Yeah.
and well, like the activists, they are like expressive, like a high stress, but the ones who are feeding the ideas, they are very analytical.
Yeah.
So the scholars and all of the people thinking about this process behind the scenes, and it sounds a little bit weird, but I experienced it
Yeah.
in reality. They have very well thought out processes and strategies. So don't kid yourself. All of the, like, the amiable energy is also involved. You feel connected and kind of belonging to a group before you accept their ideas. So there's definitely a design idea
Absolutely.
behind riots.
Absolutely. You're
Not
talking
right.
about the, whether we're talking about political movements or we're talking about cultural movements, we're talking about cult behaviors,
Yeah.
someone somewhere has to have figured it out. And
Yep.
they've mapped out a whole strategy for how this is all being deployed. And then they're sitting in their office, with their little evil fingers, manipulating the whole world, watching it all happen. But they know that in order to get people to do what they want them to do, they have to move them off center. those
Well,
people have to be
yeah,
moved up
yeah.
grid. Um,
But I want to tell you something, because we think actually what you're trying to figure out is if the change grid can give some positive use to the population, right?
yeah, yeah.
And we are sitting here in our corner of the internet thinking about how can we improve life and people and like organizations, and we have the best way of thinking and the best tools to do it, but people with bad intent, they have the same, they have this knowledge but they don't share.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's the thing about tension management, is at the core of all manipulation and all result or all defense against manipulation. And so that's one of the things I've always said about what we are focusing on, depending on the what do I say, the morals of the individual who are applying these techniques. The outcome could be very evil, or it could be very noble, but the techniques are going to be the same. And so how
Yeah,
do we go about really doing this? And one thing, since you were talking about, go ahead, but then I want to talk to you a little bit about Muslim activism and
yeah,
see if
go
something.
ahead.
Okay, well, I don't know a great deal about all the different factions inside of the world of Muslim life. So, but it seems to me that if I was someone who was trying to stir up a whole lot of trouble, trying to create my own kind of world, I would move everybody up grid. But some of those people who got moved too far up grid are going to end up out grid. And what's to stop them from creating their own competitive faction? And so that's why sometimes I kind of go like, and again, I'm not of the Muslim faith. I'm not part of a country that has a very large Muslim population. So I don't have any level of ability to converse on the subject matter. But I do seem to think like there's more than two players. There's more than two groups. So what's the difference between the Taliban and ISIS? And what's ISIS versus ISIS-K? And, you hear all these and kind of go like, what these are like, and I don't want to make this as too much of a comparison, but I feel the same way I feel when people start talking to me about all the different drug cartels that are in Mexico. So on the one hand, they're all trying to do their own manipulations, but it's like you got your own enemies among your own peers. It's the strangest thing to me. So anyway, thoughts?
Well, I can make it very, very easy for you. That's my view. In fact, all radical organizations have a very similar structure. So to the radical Muslim groups, they are local groups, and they are all triggered by a threat. So in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Muslim Brotherhood is from Egypt. They have the same DNA. There's a threat, and some of the knowledgeable people, they are exploiting this fear and triggering people into action, and that's very similar to Nazism and all these types of things. So it's not really a religious
right
base. I mean, any type of religion or system could evolve into a radical movement.
Yeah. Well,
but the common factor is a common enemy.
Right. That's one of the key motivations inside of the manipulation that's going on. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be a real general statement, but if you look at what do cults, what do these movements have in common, is someone, generally some guy, I can't think of very often when it's been a woman who's been involved with it. They're trying to control things. They're trying to amass a level of greater and greater levels of control for whatever their own personal objectives happen to be. And they may package those objectives as having some sort of noble motive behind them, but how often is it really because it's going to enrich the individual or the individuals who are at the top of whatever that manipulation happens to be? And so I'm kind of reminded, you know, we've looked a lot into cult behavior, and some of those cults have decided to reposition themselves as religions.
Yep.
Or, you know, and you just kind of go, isn't that interesting? So why? What do they really want? I think what they really want is control over the resources of other people.
There is always a political or a fundamental human basic need, like resources or power or control.
That's what the people that are
But
trying to manipulate
I,
want. Yeah.
I want to add something maybe that's also for the other listeners interesting. You may remember that we had this conversation maybe 4 years ago when I said, well, this is a manipulation tool.
Yeah.
So then your response was, we teach people that if you can't sell it, if the truth can sell it, nothing else should. And that remains the basis of my own practice.
Mm-hmm.
So if that wasn't the case, then it would be a very that would be the difference between manipulation and influencing is are you helping somebody or are you damaging somebody?
Right.
So when I give training, I explain every time these are very powerful tools, but if you use them wrongly, that is my responsibility. So I give you the disclaimer.
Right.
Be nice and go, aim for positive results for everybody. So if you are selling, don't sell bad stuff or bad solutions.
Right. Yeah, that's very, very good. In fact, I'll bet, David, you probably remember this. Do you remember when we were asked, we were in Michigan, I don't know if you were involved or not, but it was the Michigan Purchasing Management Association or some, I forget, NAPM, Michigan Association of Purchasing Managers, something like that. And they were doing a retreat. And so we put together a program. I don't know if you guys know the phrase caveat emptor. Caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. And we decided to put together a program called caveat venditor, let the seller beware. And we trained all these purchasing agents on how to recognize and defend themselves against all of the typical manipulations that sales training has been teaching for generations. And and we gave them, I don't know, there was probably a good dozen or so. I think we only had like a breakout session. So maybe a couple hours is how much time we had with the people. But we said, these are the things to listen for and to watch out for. And if you encounter any of these statements being made by sales professionals, here is how you counter it. And so as an example, in traditional sales training, if the sales representative hears the prospect say, does it come in blue? Then the sales representative says, if I can get it for you in blue, do we have a deal? So they're trying to make an issue the issue, or a factor the factor. And so we would then train the purchasing people to say, well, I can promise you this, if you can't get it in blue, there's no reason for us to continue talking. And so it was really kind of fun. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? So instead of making it the issue, no, it's just an issue. Yeah, but you'd like it to be in blue, but don't think for one moment that just because it's blue, I'm going to buy it. And so that's how I really wanted to do. So I bring that up only to illustrate that when we are teaching people these techniques as a way of helping other people, influencing other people from a place of helping them get what they want, we also want our audiences to always know that they are simultaneously learning how to recognize and defend themselves against the manipulations of others. And so I think it's really kind of good that when we're training people to sell more effectively, we're also training them to be more capable consumers, more capable buyers. So yeah, there you go. All right. Okay, well, that we just went off on a very fascinating tangent, but let's kind of get back to Herman brain dominance. So just get back to, we were able to show that each of these strengths does reside somewhere within the respective quadrants or close to the quadrants as we already know them. Again, needs to be rotated for it to really overlay properly, but nevertheless, we found this resonates. Again, they do not all occur simultaneously. They occur in different spots inside of that region of the change grid. But then we started talking a little bit about what's the shadow side, what's the dark side of each one of these. And that's when we were able to see this Herman brain dominance model stretch from just inside that green circle out a little bit between the green and the red, and even talk a little bit about what happens when things become profoundly out of balance. And I thought that was an interesting thing. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I have a question. So let's say we did a task, we did a change grid and we put up a task list and found that the majority of the items on the task list were left cerebral blue.
Yeah.
Do we infer anything from that?
Yeah. In fact, we would say that those tasks, I could predict going backwards, those tasks are primarily perceived as being analytical in nature. These are things that everyone feels as though they have figured them all out. They know how to do them. They've got processes, procedures. They've got history doing it. They've had the experience. All that kind of stuff is settled. And that should resonate very much with it. Now, is that how we want them to actually be viewing it? Generally, in our work with clients, we find out that we want them to take all of that solid stuff they've got down grid and apply it to a new challenge. So we want them to move from being left cerebral to right cerebral. Again, mastery lives down grid, but the problem is that mastery also leads to untapped potential, which means unrealized missions, unfulfilled, there's no growth down grid. So how often are we hired by clients to say, can we take these people who are really good at what they've been doing up to now and get them to reapply those to a whole new level of challenge? So what I recognize from my work with clients is that clients do not ask us to move people from being cerebral to being limbic. They want us to stay on that whole logical, capable, high perceived level of ability side of things, but they're always wanting us to raise the bar. Raise the bar, raise the bar. And just the phrase raise the bar means increase the challenge to, have that person put what they think they know to the test, or maybe apply it in a whole new creative, different sort of way.
Yeah.
Did that get close to what you were thinking, David?
Yep. No, it does. I just, I'm thinking about the change grid and task lists and whether or not we can infer anything from that about the person, not the tasks.
Well, I do believe that if we ask someone to give us, we just say, hey, put together a list of a bunch of things you want your people to start doing, stop doing, continue doing, what it all is. Based on just the list they put together, we can often tell you where they are on the change grid.
Right.
Because if they start using words like, well, we want them to get more excited, we want them to feel the mission, I kind of go like, that's not cerebral. You're trying to trigger a little bit more of the limbic kind of stuff.
Right.
To go on with them. But usually our clients say we want them to do more of X, accomplish Y, stop doing Z. These are more behaviorally on that cerebral side of things. Maybe some of it's right, maybe some of it's left, but nevertheless, it's still on this side of things. Yeah.
T, I have a tool that I'm going to send to you. It's called a leadership impact survey. Maybe the cultural survey would be better, but it's broken up into 3 sections: constructive styles, and then passive and aggressive defensive styles. I'm very interested to see where that lands on the change grid.
I'm happy to do that. So send it over because, moving forward, I really only wanted to talk about Gregoric and Herman brain dominance, but there are a lot of other learning models. But I'm very open to saying no, show me another model and let's see how it builds upon this. And I'll call it something other than learning. How do they frame it? It's a what kind of model?
So it's a development model. It's both a cultural and a development model.
Mm-hmm.
It measures people's tendencies in their leadership styles to either be constructive, which
Okay.
are productive and increasing velocity and results and everything else,
Yeah.
or they can be passive or aggressive defensive, which really slows down and frustrates results.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be great to look at just to find out. I wonder if it overlays on the whole change grid. Is it concentrated in the outgrid section of it? So by all means, send it over, and I'm
All
happy
right.
to look at that one next. Yeah, Joseph, go right ahead. Your hand was up. What would you like to chime in?
I'm afraid I'm stealing your time, but
You are never
since you,
stealing our time.
since
You
you
feel free.
since we're talking about learning styles,
Mhm.
I didn't find it in the Herman brain dominance section,
Yeah.
because in their book they are talking about change. Education is the basic of change.
Yeah.
So I thought immediately about the overlay with situational leadership, and I heard
Yes.
David talk about it.
Yeah.
I would be interested in your explanation. Maybe you did it 20 years ago, but
Oh yeah. No, happy to.
about leadership and learning overlay on the change grid.
Well,
Could you
interestingly
explain it
enough,
a bit?
and you are right, we have chatted about this in the past, but I'm more than happy to revisit it. Keep in mind that there's not only the change grid, there's also the master stream. And
Yeah.
because leadership is actually more of an influencing activity, anything related to leadership, if we're talking about a process inside of leadership, it's more than likely going to overlay on the master stream. Nevertheless, it's still going to be talking about managing these different levels of productive tension. We're just going to be looking at how it maps over a period of time. So I think you guys know this, that all the master stream really is a recording or a projected recording of how tension changes over time, and how we kind of manage that flow of tension, etc. Nevertheless, it's still the change grid. And probably you guys have heard me say, think of the change grid as being an EKG machine, at least an old-fashioned one. An old-fashioned EKG machine, tension's going up and down, cardiac activity is going up and down, and it's got all these little pens that are drawing on a piece of paper, moving through it, what's happening with the activity of the different areas of the heart. Well, to me, it's the same thing. And that is, by the way, why the change grid is up on its corner, because as the tension goes up and down, what we're going to do is see the tracing on that piece of paper, that master stream, is going to change. People have sometimes said, well, that's great. It's showing the master stream shows what's happening as far as upgrade and downgrade changes in tension. How does it show the drive that's in there? And what I said to them is that what's different between the master stream and the paper going through an EKG machine is that the paper on an EKG machine is traveling through the machine at a strict controlled pace, where tension management is prone to periods of great acceleration and deceleration. And so hopefully that's not too much for you guys to kind of wrap your head around, but that's how we go, like, oh no, tension is still going up and down, but sometimes it goes up and down very fast. And sometimes it takes its own good time. And so the velocity, the speed with which the movement along the master stream happens is very changeable. So it's very, forget the words, but the speed will accelerate or decelerate depending on what's happening in that situation. Thoughts about that? We're at the top of the hour. So is that interesting, not so interesting, painful to even?
Extraordinary explanation. My last question is the master stream that influence and leadership. So you are trying to reach an agreement on change, like a contract, like you do in selling.
Yeah, we're trying to get to some sort of a decision point, but keep in mind that the change grid, or rather the master stream, talks about 3 different levels of commitment that we might be looking for. So that is a commitment in principle, a commitment in the process, so staying moving forward on what the process is, and a commitment in fact. That commitment in fact is where the deal would get signed, or the person would say, yep, I agree. That's where that kind of happens. But there's a whole lot of good stuff that comes out of the master stream long before that commitment in fact happens. So,
Nice.
because influencing, am I just trying to influence someone to keep their mind open? If I'm just trying to influence them to keep their mind open, that's hardly a sign on the dotted line sort of a situation. It's just, I'm just trying to manage their attention well enough that I can get them in power and sustain them in power over the course of X amount of time. Or talking perhaps more specifically about the kinds of work that I know David gets involved with, is that when we are working with highly temperamental executives, sometimes we just want to know, can I just manage their tension so during this board meeting, they don't go ballistic, they just stay in a decent range of tension on the thing, in which case that's what we're really trying to do, is move them into that kind of middle band on the master stream, and can we just keep them there? While this board meeting happens, and maybe good things will happen because of that. So, yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah, anytime we're talking about influencing someone, and inside of influencing, all forms of leadership fall into that. Any management attempt falls into that. Certainly anything having to do with sales, but also romance falls into that. There's a master stream associated with the whole mating ritual, the whole dance of dating, and that sort of a thing. So yeah, it's all tension management, but sometimes we want to look at how it's flowing as opposed to a single movement on the change grid. Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts, concepts, questions?
Thanks, T.
All righty. Good talking to you guys. We'll talk again on Thursday. So bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.
Hi,
all.
everybody.
Bye, everybody. Happy birthday, Linda.
Thank you, David.
Happy birthday.